Ibrahim by Kola was Ogbeni. Alakada, Yoruba translation, collection of poetry written originally in English by Emily Grosholz. That's right. You completed the sentence. That is the name that you need to look out for the scholar. He's the man of the moment. He's written this wonderful book and it's wonderful illustrations. I'm very proud to be the owner of one of these books, which I purchased a few weeks ago. And I've got one in my hands here, and I'm on the soil of the motherland. Yes, Nigeria, Africa. So go out and buy this book. I mean, it's a rich, textured account, and it's a commentary on contemplation in life and places in the process of adopting and raising children. And I think this will hit home with a lot of literary enthusiasts, especially those of the Yoruba language. But even if you don't speak language, the language of Yoruba, you should acquire one of these copies because it will become one of those far-fetched, rare commodities of the future. And it's a bilingual collection. Oh, there you go. There you go. You can hear that in the background. That's the author telling you that it's written in both Yoruba and English. The German copy is coming. Thank you, sir.
That was my colleague. That was my friend and colleague, Femi Lukoju Jr., who gave the beautiful endorsement. And thank you, everyone. I thought that was a nice welcome for all of us who have joined us this evening. I'm happy to see you, all my friends and colleagues. My name is Kola Tubosun. I'm the translator of this book, Ibrahim, originally by Emily Grosholz. I'm going to hand over to Jumoke Verissimo, who is hosting the event. But before then, I want to tell everyone that the meeting is being recorded. So if you have fun with showing up on the screen, you might want to put off your camera or something. Also, that you should please make sure your computer remains mute when you're not speaking so that we can have a nice conversation. Thank you, and over to you, Jumoke.
Thank you, Kola. So welcome everyone to this reading fun time with this time to enjoy this beautiful collection. I'm hoping that at the end of this launch, you'd all get a copy. So before we even start, I would want us to enjoy the translation before we go on to question Kola and Emily. So first, we have the honor of having Marilyn Nelson here, and of course, the Marilyn Nelson, the award-winning author of several acclaimed poetry books, children's book, and she's going to read from the collection, the poem Primary School, and Ayodele Olofintuade would read Ile Eko Alakobere. Now, I want us to immerse ourselves in the poetry and the work that has gone into this before we now ask the authors questions. So if you please help with reading Primary School, Marilyn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Pleased to be here and looking forward to hearing the translation of Emily's poems. This is Primary School. My 4 children learned to read here, to talk back and repent in the principal's office, to unlock the ivory puzzle box of the multiplication tables, to utter a few lovely phrases of Japanese, to marry and give birth and die in imaginary covered wagons laboring from St. Louis to Sacramento. Today, my daughter read an essay to the assembly, and my youngest son played a Mozart air on his fiddle. So for the last time, I visited their first school easterly, namesake perhaps of the morning star that shines only a little while before and after dawn, though secretly it is also the evening star and the errant planet Venus. 14 years under this tangle of elm trees, lindens, black walnuts, pin oaks that rust bronze in October, maples that launch their bright wings downwards in April. I wrote my name on a paper badge marked visitor and kept it afterwards as if it might somehow later reopen the doors, sealed now by the guardian of years.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading. Thank you very much, Marilyn. Thank you very much, Marilyn, for the beautiful rendition of that poetry, of that poem.
Thank you.
Now would get the opportunity to also listen to the translation titled Ile Eko Alakobere, and Ayodele Olofintuade would be reading the Yoruba version for us before we now go on to talk to the authors. Ayodele, if you're here, please can you read the poem for us?
Okay. Hi, Jumoke.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. I'll be reading the translation of Ile Eko Alakobere, as translated by Kola Tubosun. Ìwé Ilé Ẹ̀kọ́ Alákọ̀ọ́bẹ̀rẹ̀. Àwọn ọmọ mi mẹ́rẹ̀ẹ̀rin kọ́ láti kàwé níbí, láti bọ̀ padà, àti láti ronúpìwàdà nínú ọ́fíìsì ọ̀gá ilé ẹ̀kọ́, láti ṣí àpótí arúnilójú funfun tí a fi ń ṣètò ohun àròpọ̀ nọ́mbà, láti sọ àwọn ọ̀rọ̀ aládùn díẹ̀ lédè Jápánì, láti ṣègbéyàwó àti láti bímọ àti láti kú sí inú. Àwọn ọkọ̀ oníbòrí àwòsínú tó ń rẹrù láti Sacramento. Lónìí, ọmọ mi ka àròkọ kan fún àkójọpọ̀ ẹgbẹ́ rẹ̀. Lónìí, ọmọ mi ọkùnrin tó kéré jù fi dòjí ẹ̀ kọrin mùsáàtì. Nítorí náà, fún ìgbà ìkẹyìn, mo kàn sí iléèwé wọn àkọ́kọ́, Easterly, olórúkọ ìràwọ̀ òwúrọ̀ tó ń tàn yóyó. Fún ìgbà díẹ̀ kí ilẹ̀ tó mọ́ àti lẹ́yìn ẹ̀, ó tiẹ̀ jẹ́ ní bòńkẹ́lẹ́, òun náà ni ìràwọ̀ ìrọ̀lẹ́ àti ìràwọ̀ ojú ọ̀run Fínọ́ọ̀sì. Ọdún 14 lábẹ́ ìsopọ̀ ẹ̀ka igi elm, líndẹ́nì, àwùsá dúdú, àpàdó alẹ́ tó máa ń dògún lóṣù kẹwàá. Mépùlù gbé apá rẹ̀ onímọ́lẹ̀ sílẹ̀ lóṣù kẹrin. Mo kọrúkọ mi sórí bébà ìdánimọ̀ tí a kọ àlejò sí. Mo sì dì í mú lẹ́yìn ọ̀rẹyìn bíi pé ó lè tún lẹ̀kùn ṣí lọ́jọ́ iwájú. Ilẹ̀kùn tí àwọn aṣọ́nà ọdún ti pa báyìí. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ayo. No doubt, this is a beautiful, Emily is reading very beautiful poetry, and Kola has done wonderful work here. So let's meet the authors. Emily is an American philosopher. She's a poet, a literary critic, and she's also the liberal arts research professor of philosophy, African American studies and English at the Pennsylvania State University. She is also a member of the Center for Fundamental Theory, Institute for Gravitation and the Cosmos. Thank you for writing this book, Emily. And just a brief introduction to, so that we also meet Kola Tubosun. Kola Tubosun is a Nigerian writer. She is a linguist and winner of the Premier Ostana Prize 2016, and was recently a Chevening Research Fellow at the British Library. He's worked in, done some work in translation. He's translated works by Ngugu Wationgo, Chimamanda Adichie, Lanrewaju Adepoju, and Sarah Ladipo Mayinka. I'm glad to be interviewing both of you this morning. So the first question I would like to ask, I would like to begin with Kola, by asking what inspired you to translate Emily's work.
Thank you very much. There were three things. First of all, I was contacted by Alex Peppo, who I believe is here with us, who had found me somehow on the internet and was looking for an African language into which the book we published. So that was the first motivation. The second one is that after I got the contact, I looked up Emily. I hadn't heard about her before, and I read a few things she had written. And because of that, I really got interested in, her work, and I wanted to engage with it. But most importantly, for many of you who know my work, I wanted to have an opportunity to translate poetry from English into Yoruba, which is my language. I have spoken about this in many other forums about the lack of translation opportunities for African languages. The only opportunities we have usually are works being translated from Yoruba, from African languages to English, and so very few. I've done some work in that regard myself, but this is the first time I'm doing poetry. And I thought it would be nice to engage in that space, and, show that it's an opportunity that needs to exist, and that people can read literature in the African language if they're given the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kola. I think we are lucky to have you translate Emily's work, which brings me to you, Emily. I would like to know if you can recall the very first poem that inspired this collection. As a parent myself, I enjoyed reading the poems, and I think they're very beautiful poems. I don't think this is the first time you'd hear that. But I'd like to know the very first poem that inspired this collection, or perhaps the experience that gave birth to this lovely poetry collection.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. I was asking if you can recall the very first poem that inspired the poetry collection, that inspired your writing the book. Do you remember a poem that led to the book, or was it an experience? How did you come about the idea? Why did you decide to write a book on childhood? Can you hear me, Emily?
Yes. I think the main answer is all my 4 children were very inspiring. And it was really inspiring to give birth. It was really inspiring to adopt. And then they were themselves all really inspiring. And they always said funny things. They always said interesting things. And a lot of what they said inspired me to write a poem.
Wow. Thank you so much for the answer. It shows actually.
And I should add too that Katerina and I made this book also because of UNICEF,
Okay.
Which we think is a really, really important organization that helps children all over the world.
Yeah, and I should mention that a percentage of the sales from the book is going to UNICEF or organizations working to help children around the world. So that's another one of the motivations.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the good work you're doing with also helping UNICEF as well. So I think I could also ask you now, Kola, knowing that you're a parent as well and a poet, and you've also written a chapbook which was published in Saraba, Attempted Speech and Other Fatherhood Poems. And that particular chapbook delves into your parenting experience as well. I mean, I'm wondering what does it mean to translate poems about parenting by another poet? How is the experience different from writing your own poetry?
Yeah. I remember thinking when I started the work that, oh, one of the reasons why I think I was drawn to it was because I had done some work myself in poetry about raising children and all. And I find children really fascinating. So I really wanted to know how another person did the work. And so, because mine was a chapbook, it was not a full book. And I was thinking one day I would, turn into a full book and stuff like that. I thought it was nice to at least try to engage with what some other person had done and translate into Yoruba. It's different, of course, writing your own work and translating some other person's. Translation is a kind of a beautiful game of sitting down and you're engaging with a part of your brain that deals with a different language that you speak and another side of your brain which deals with separate language that you also speak. And what I realized, of course, as I've done with many translation efforts, is that my Yoruba, even though it's very, I know that I'm competent in it, has receded somewhat into the back of my memory. So I have to dig in and drag out things that I otherwise would have been able to easily say when I was young, when I spoke Yoruba exclusively. Now I have to think back and sometimes make really interesting decisions as to what to say and how to say it. So translation is different. There are parts of it that's creative, which is, you're trying to write things in your own way. But also it's mostly receiving something from some other person, retooling it, and then bringing it out in a different way.
We're going to come to some of the challenges and that you mentioned here. But because I wouldn't want people to get bored, I want us to enjoy the poetry and enjoy the conversation with the authors as well. I'm going to pause briefly and have a poetry reading, and this is going to be the method we'd use. Would have poetry, and then we'll come back to the authors. So I'm wondering if Robbie is here to read Twelfth Night on page 22, and or rather, yeah, I think right now we could have Katerina read. We'll come back to Robbie later. Let's Kola and Katerina read Àwọn Ọ̀tá Gidi.
Otta.
Ọ̀tá Gidi. I have the yeah. Àwọn Ọ̀tá Gidi, yes. Real bullets. And Kola, you read the Yoruba version, and Katerina would read the English version.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, I think you should start this time.
Okay, all right. There goes. Àkọ́bí ọmọ mi, ọmọkùnrin ọwọ́ ọ̀tún, máa ń lọ síbikíbi lásìkò pẹ̀lú ìbọn aláfẹ́, pẹ̀lú abúgbẹ̀mù F4 aláwọ̀ fàdákà, Messerschmitt .38 òfìfo, àti ìbọn ọdẹ oníke tó lọ́ta oníjẹ̀bẹ̀jẹ̀bẹ̀ nínú ṣùgbọ́n tó sì ń tani lára. This is on page 61, by the way, for anyone following. Òǹgbẹ fún ìtàn ìjàkadì jẹ́ ìfẹ́ alágolo. Tísàlẹ̀ jọ ọ̀gbun Marianas ni àti àìmọye gálọ́ọ̀nù iṣẹ́ àwọn ọ̀tá. Àwọn awakọ̀ ojú ọ̀run tó ń fìgboyà hàn lórí ìlú Germany. Ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ bàálù apanirun tó ń pín òkun Pacific yẹ́lẹyẹ̀lẹ. Wọ́n ń ṣàn wọlé lójoojúmọ́ lásìkò oúnjẹ àárọ̀, ọ̀sán, àtalẹ́ láti ọ̀dọ̀ bàbá ẹ̀ tó gbẹ̀kọ́ dáadáa. Ọmọ fúnra ẹ̀, ọmọ oníṣẹ́ ogun orí omi, òun tó máa ń fi àwọn ọmọ ẹ̀ sílẹ̀ fún oṣù 3 lọ́dọọdún. láti lọ rú gbogbo ohun ìjà olóró tí a gbìn sílẹ̀ nínú ogun tó ti parí. Kí ló dé tí bàbá ò dàgbà láti darapọ̀ mọ́ àwọn ológun omi bíi bàbá àgbà? Àkọ́bí mi ọkùnrin yẹ̀ mí wò pẹ̀lú ìtìjú díẹ̀. Ọmọ, kódà bàbá ẹ̀ gbìyànjú púpọ̀ láti má kópa túláàsì, kò fẹ́ rárá láti balẹ̀ ní Vietnam tó wọlé sínú ogun burúkú. Kí ni ìkópa túláàsì? Nígbà ogun, àwọn ìjọba máa ń sábà lo ẹ̀tọ́ wọn láti mú àwọn ará ìlú jà bí ológun. Àwọn ọkùnrin ìlú, àfikún ẹ̀. Mo kọjú sí ọmọkùnrin kékeré, kò dá mi lójú bóyá ọ̀rọ̀ yìí o. Óyè, kí ló dé? Ó béèrè pẹ̀lú ìgbónára òjijì. Ó túmọ̀ sí pé ìjọba wa lè mú mi jagun. Ẹ ń sọ pé wọ́n lè rán mi lọ sójú ogun láti fara gbọta. Wọ́n á rán mi jáde síta níbi tí àwọn ìbọn àti ọta á ti máa yìnbọn ní ọta gidi. Bàálù Messerschmitt dẹnu kọlẹ̀ sílẹ̀ ilé ìdáná. Sójà kékeré mi, ọmọ ọwọ́ ọ̀tún, ń sunkún líle. Èmi sì rèé tí mo ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ń mọye ìbànújẹ́ àtijọ́ nípa bíbímọ ọkùnrin, ń sunkún pẹ̀lú ẹ̀, a sì ṣubú sínú apá ara wa. Thank you.
Thank you, Kola. Katerina, do you mind reading the English version of this very lovely?
Absolutely. It's an honor to read any poem by Emily Grosholz, but I really like this one, Real Bullets. And I'll read to you from this book, which is a translation of Childhood into Bulgarian. So in English, Real Bullets. My firstborn child, son of the right hand, goes everywhere lately, fabulously armed with silver F4 bombers, Messerschmitts, empty 38s, and plastic rifles loaded with spongy projectiles that still hurt. His thirst for battle lore is a tin cup whose bottom drains the Marianas Trench and salty gallons of enemy engagements, air corps tearing over German cities, fleets of destroyers carving the Pacific, flow in every day at breakfast, lunch, and dinner from his well-instructed father, child himself of a Navy careerman who used to leave his children 6 months early to sweep the minefields of a finished war. Why didn't Dad grow up and join the Navy like Grandpa? My eldest son examines me, somehow embarrassed. Son, in fact, your father tried hard not to get drafted. He never wanted to land in Vietnam, sunk in a bad war. What's drafted? Usually governments in wartime exercise their right to make citizens fight as soldiers. Male citizens, I add, turning to face my little boy, uncertain whether he understands. He understands. What? He demands, suddenly agitated. You mean our government could make me fight? You mean they could send me out on a battlefield to get shot? Send me out in the open where enemy guns would really be shooting at me? Real bullets? The Messerschmitt nosedives to the kitchen floor, and my small soldier, son of the right hand, is weeping hard. And I, who equally suddenly understand the old doom of bearing sons, weep with him, and we fall in each other's arms.
Thank you so much, Katerina. I should also mention that Katerina translated Childhood into Bulgarian. So we are also honored to have you here. I'm sure the experience of translating Emily's work is also most likely the same for you and Kola. Now, I'm going to ask, go back and start asking questions. So I'm going to ask Emily right now a question. Knowing that this particular anthology has been translated into several languages, Swahili, German.
I'm still having trouble hearing you. I'm sorry.
Okay, Jumoke, you have to
Okay.
speak up a little bit.
Actually, I'm practically screaming here, but I'll try to speak louder. That's open my neighbors. Okay, so here, can you hear me now, Emily?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, knowing that this work has been translated into a number of languages, Swahili, German, Spanish, Bangla, Italian, Bulgarian, to mention a few, and even it's been set to music as well in some of those translations. And I'm certain this is a unique experience. I mean, the experience as a writer, seeing your work come alive is actually different from the writing process itself. So I'm wondering if you ever wonder if in the process of translation, some of the nuances that you intend to convey will be lost in translation. Do you have any concern about this? And also, I should also to ask a second question related to this very first one. What motivates you to continue to have your work translated? So my question is, the first one is, do you worry that some of the nuances of that you want to convey will be lost in translation or mistranslated? And what motivates you to continue translating your work into more languages? Yeah. You can go on, Emily. I'm done with it.
Yeah, I have gotten really, really interesting questions from all the people who have translated this book. And it made me realize what things are universal and what things are culturally very specific. And, you know, there are some things that, like the Japanese translators just wouldn't translate. And because it just didn't make sense, or they just couldn't explain it. But, you know, so not everything can be translated, but everybody does their best to do what they can do. And I know that the people who are the translators, you know, are very good at what they do. And so I just have faith in them. And I think that because everybody around the world really loves their kids, that there's plenty of aspects of this book that are universal. And, you know, I think that's why I'm especially happy that it's being translated around the world.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I guess more people get the opportunity to read your poetry and like you rightly said, the universality, what we share and the things that we don't share, culture specific things. So Kola.
Yes.
I know you as a linguist, and I interested in the approach to translating Emily's work. You know, I would assume that your translation took the linguistic approach, but I want to hear from you. What approach did you take in translating this work? And especially because in the notes on translation where you that is in the book, that introduces it by way. You said you begin by saying translating is affirming, a pleasure of ferrying words from one language reality into another, so great in itself as to be its own reward. Now, my question is connected to your approach to translating this work. I want you to talk about what is being affirmed in translation, and the episode. What do you mean by the episode of pleasure? What episodes of pleasure are derived from the translation process, and what do you consider essentially the reward? If you go on and answer the question, I'm sure I can repeat it. I hope I haven't.
I'm fine. Thank you. Yes, I was speaking with Marilyn earlier that, and this experience I've found with many people who in translation is that we enjoy the process itself. Just the idea of sitting down and thinking about how to translate one expression to another, how to decide what to do with this verse, whether to translate line by line or translate paragraph by paragraph, ideas by ideas. And so that's a very interesting process for me to make those decisions on an individual basis. So you mentioned, you asked about what angle I took. You mentioned linguistics, and really what I did was mainly to say to myself, this work has been written in English for a different audience by a certain person from a different culture. And I want other people in my culture to be able to read and understand it. And so my approach was to say, how can I best express what has been expressed without losing too much of what has originally been said, but also not losing the new audience, especially when the ideas are things that are not present in ours. So, Disneyland, for instance, was mentioned a few times. Particular locations that are not specific to my own space. So the decisions I made was a balance between expressing everything that the author has said, which I thought was very important, but also saying it in a way that that can transmute into Yoruba poetry. And that was the biggest challenge, actually, because Yoruba, like you know, is a poetic language in itself, and poetry written originally in Yoruba follows totally different patterns, and they follow rhythm and cadence and all of that. And this time I'm translating something from English, which uses rhyme and other means of creating beauty into Yoruba. And so some things were lost, of course, in that if you read the Yoruba without the English, you are not reading Yoruba poetry. You're reading translation of English poetry. In Yoruba poetry, I mean, it's not impossible to translate it directly into Yoruba poetry with all the bells and whistles, but it would have taken way too long. It might have reduced, taken so much more from the original, and it would have become a totally different work. I mean, even now it's still a different work, but there is a middle point in which I tell myself to make sure that the most important thing is that the message of this book and the cadence and the ideas of the original author is preserved, while the meaning is also encouraged in a new language. That also gives me a chance to create new ways of expressing myself in Yoruba. I hope that makes sense. You have to unmute yourself, I think.
It does. Thank you, Kola, for that response. Before we go on to listen to more poetry, I would like to ask Emily one question. And I would like to find out if you learned in the conversations that you had with Kola, because you mentioned earlier that you, in the different translations, in the process of translating the book into different languages, you always found something that some things were universal and some things were cultural specific. So I would want to know if you have learned or understood anything about Yoruba language as a result of this project that you could use in your future writing, that and if you've had any similar learning process in the other translations. Hello, Emily.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So you were thinking, so just say it one more time. What?
Okay, so the question I asked is if in the process of having the conversations with Kola about the translation, did you learn or understand anything about the Yoruba language that could be useful in your future writing? And if you've gone through a similar learning process in previous translations. So in conversations with the translator, some things that you learned that could be useful when you're writing poetry in future. Did you learn anything from this translation process working with Kola?
So, you know, mostly what I learned about was what couldn't really be translated. I think that might be a better question for him about, you know, what things he learned from translating it into Yoruba that sort of developed the poem in a way that isn't developed in my English version. I mean, can we ask him that? I mean,
Jumoke, you are muted again.
I mean, what I was learning was that you know, what couldn't be translated, like putting on the Ritz. How did you translate putting on the Ritz?
That was my favorite one, actually. So to give you a background, putting on the Ritz, which a phrase I found out for the first time as well, means kind of dressing up and, you know, being fanciful and stuff like that. But the way it was used.
By the way, Will wants to read that poem.
Yes.
And Will and Robbie want to read some of the soccer poems. Of course, soccer is very universal, by the way. Right?
Yes, indeed. So when in putting on the Ritz, to answer your question, Jumoke, I realized that not just, I mean, the translation would have been easier if it's just, you know, the expression putting on the Ritz, which is, you know, showing up in fancy full clothing and all that. But the poem itself also then played on the Ritz as a place, because the poem was written when the author had visited the Ritz-Carlton somewhere. And we talked about this during the process. And so I was looking for a way to combine those two ways of expressing that expression and also dealing with it as a title of a poem. So I ended up with Ayodele Kondudu, I think, Ritz. So otherwise, if the poem had not had something to do with her being at the Ritz, I could have just translated directly as Ayodele Kondudu, which is like Yoruba way of saying somebody is really, really, you know, dressed up nice and stuff like that. But also she was also at the Ritz, so I then added along with. So there are things like that that come up, and it was just interesting to make those decisions and decide how to express it.
Okay. Thanks, Kola. Actually, I had tied the question because I wanted to weigh the writer's perspective and then the translator's perspective.
It was mostly me. It was mostly me calling her and asking her questions about particular things that I wanted to be sure were not so were not just English limitations, but also had, you know, poetic dimensions that I needed to clarify before I translated. You understand?
Yeah, I mean, how did you develop poems in your translation? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kola. I think one question that I could just to expand the question a little is I sometimes wonder if you felt like you were writing a new poem in the course of doing the translation itself. So you could speak on that as well.
Yes,
when you're
yes, not all the time. Like I said, I tried not to do too much of spinning to a new thing, which is doable. But as you know, Yoruba has so many different poetic overs, and it could be Ewi, it could be Jala, it could be different other ways of expressing poetry. And if you had to create it, you could take that English poem and turn into so many different Yoruba poems. So what I did was mostly just convey the meaning as much as I can into Yoruba version of written poetry. And there's a challenge there because, again, Yoruba written poetry, as we know, doesn't have the same beauty as Yoruba performance poetry. And so this Yoruba reasoning poetry, which is his own type of genre. But there are instances where I had to, like I mentioned, the Yoruba one, where I had to create, I found the appropriate equivalent in Yoruba. So there's a particular example here where, okay, it says, the line says, whose eyes are those? Bituminous black eyes. And I translated it as Oju awon wo niyen, dudu bi koro ishin. So that koro ishin is a common way of Yoruba referring to something very black. And I didn't need to worry about what bituminous meant, because I know bitumen is also black. But we don't use bitumen as a means of describing blackness. So instances exist there where I found appropriate equivalent in Yoruba, and I just mostly just stuck with those.
Thank you so much, Kola. I also would want to say thank you everyone for joining us. If you're just joining us, welcome aboard. We are discussing Kola bilingual translation of Emily Grosholz's poetry collection. And thank you, Kola and Emily, so far for the questions. I think we can take a break now and listen to a poem from the collection by Robbie and Gide Salawu. Robbie would read 12th Night. It's on page 22, and Gide Salawu would read the Yoruba version. Robbie, if you wouldn't mind, we're ready to listen to you now.
Sure. Which poem was that again?
12th Night. It's on page 22. I don't know if you have a copy of this.
I do. Just give me one moment to find it. Yep. All right. All right. So 12th Night. The Christmas tree is dry, resin dropping twigs whose silky needles stroked my hand in Advent, break and crumble. Time, high time, to take the strung lights down, the ornaments that shiver. And from the mantelpiece, the gilded star beside the homeless family it shone on. Our house in space is here. Our house in time is the terrestrial year, marked for us by the sun's near disappearance in night and winter storm. And those three painted fugitives who huddle against the chill of a wind-riddled fire to greet a mortal baby, small and warm.
All right, can you hear me? All right, so.
Thank you so much, Robbie. And Gide, can you please read Alekejila, the Yoruba translation?
All right. Alekejila, igi kérésìmesì ti gbẹ, ẹ̀ka igi onímájèlé tabẹ́rẹ́ wọn, pa mí lọ́wọ́ lásìkò bíbọ̀ wálé kan, ó sì dẹrùkù ìgbà àsìkò láti mú àwọn okùn iná wálẹ̀, àwọn ohun mèremère tó ń gbọ̀n rèrè, àti láti orí pèpéle ilé, ìràwọ̀ aláràbarà lẹ́gbẹ̀ẹ́ ẹbí aláìnílé tó ń tàn lórí tó ń tàn lé lórí. Ilé wa òfurufú ti dé. Ilé wa lásìkò yìí jẹ́ ọdún orílẹ̀ tí a kà fún wa láti ọwọ́ oòrùn tó fẹ́ pòórá. Lálẹ́ àti nínú ìjì òjò ìrò dídì, àti àwọn èèyàn aláìnílé mẹ́ta tí a kùn, tí wọ́n foríkorí láti gbara wọn là lọ́wọ́ tútù ilé ìkẹ́ran sí. Láti kí ọmọ tuntun ẹlẹ́ran ara kékeré ọlọ́wọ́rọ̀ káàbọ̀. Ẹ ṣé.
Thank you, Jide. Thank you so much for reading that wonderful work of reading the translation of Kola's work. So we would go back to asking the author's question now. And Kola, I would like to ask you, we talked about the cultural objects, the challenges of translating specific words into Yoruba language. And one of the things that I encountered in reading the poem is that where you invented some words where none existed. Like for instance, snow became irididi, right? And which is quite brilliant. And then there is this crepes cutlet, which you described as bante idi. And then the same translation for ododo, which you translate, crepe you translated as ododo, and then flowers as ododo. So I know we've talked about the problems of translating specific words, but I want you to talk about when you encountered words that do not exist in the Yoruba language, for instance. What decisions do you make in deciding whether you have to invent new words or just Yorubalize the word? So what were the decisions that informed the specific words you used in such cases?
Yes, thank you. For the snow, for a long time I had battled with the contemporary acceptance of snow as Iyi in Yoruba. Anytime you ask people what is snow, they say Iyi, and I just couldn't accept it because Iyi was ice, and we've known Iyi for ice, and the closest thing to ice in English would be maybe hail when it rains solid blocks of frozen matter. So I wanted something else for snow, and then I knew that I was not going to use Iyi, and I didn't want to use snow because I think I've read some hymns where snow, S-N-O, was used as the translation, something like white as snow or from the snow. So I thought we needed something else. So Iri just came in handy because Iri is dew, and snow is basically just frozen dew, which is kind of easy to easy to melt, and if it rains down, etc. So it's like frozen dew, and you can find that in the fridge as well, and it's not in when you can scrape it out and see it in your hands. So that was my intention. As with many things, it might catch on, it might not. But my own satisfaction is that I put it in my own work. If people want to use it, that's appropriate. The skirtlet matter, it was one of those instances where I had to find out what the skirtlet was, and it was kind of a garment. And then, bante was something similar to that in Yoruba, which might not be the exact same thing, but it was something I could use. So yeah, I mean, I assume that not everything I've done is perfect, but it's out there and people can improve on it, and even I can improve on it in subsequent editions if possible. But it's just interesting. I enjoy just the process itself of getting to battle with the different ways in which I could express a new concept in a new language, or an old concept in a new language. Thank you.
Thank you, Kola. I think you've done a beautiful job here. So don't try to be on. We all appreciate what you've done. And considering that we have very few translations into Yoruba, I think this is a good thing. And now that we can move on to Emily and ask a question about Autumn Sonata. It's on page 24. And it's
Jumoke? Sorry, 1 second. I think the things you're moving on the table are adding to the feedback.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to shift less now. So yeah, Emily, the poem Autumn Sonata, I found quite
the poem what?
Autumn Sonata. It's on page 24.
Autumn Sonata.
Oh, Autumn Sonata.
Yeah. So it's a poem that conveys babbling and the language acquisition in a child's development. I think Kola is going to answer this question too, because it's that sense of translating a child's babbling, right, is what you engage with in this poem, if I do understand it. And I'm interested in the way that this particular poem raises some philosophical questions about a child's growing relationship with the world around them. And I'm interested in how you as a writer, this translating that experience for you into poetry. What was the experience like? Was it in its sense a form of translation in itself? You know, translating a child's babbling, that sense of language acquisition, that process, was it a form of translation for you as a writer, as a poet as well? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I'm still having trouble hearing you. I'm sorry, honey. So
I'm going to draw.
I mean,
can you hear me now? I'm going to draw the computer closer so to be closer to the mic. Is it better?
You're asking me a question about Autumn Sonata, right?
Yes, yes. I was asking you about the process of writing, of translating that child babbling process. You know, the poem itself is about the language acquisition in a child's development, understanding a child when they're in that process of babbling and trying to understand the world around them.
Right.
And I was wondering if that listening process, listening to the child babble itself, felt like a translation process for you as well as a poet.
So, you know, it is interesting to watch a child learn how to talk. And of course, I wrote this one before my first child learned how to talk. You know, I've done some translation myself from French into English. And I learned a lot from that, but I was thinking maybe I should read the first poem in the book, which is really about listening, which is about the importance of talking. I mean, I can do that later.
You can do it. Jumoke, you're muted.
What's that?
I was saying you could go on and read the poem itself.
Please read the poem.
Please read the poem.
Okay. Listening. Words in my ear and someone still unseen. Not yet quite viable, but quietly a stir inside my body. Not yet quite named, and yet I weave a birthplace for him out of words. Part of the world persists distinct from what we say, but part will stay only if we keep talking. Only speech can recreate the gardens of the world. Not the rose itself, but the school of night assembled at its side, arguing, praising, whom we now recall. A rose can sow its seed alone but poets need their auditors, and mothers need their language for a cradle. My son's still on his stalk. Rides between the silence of the flowers and conversations offered by his parents, wise and foolish talk, to draw him out. And that was one of the cultural references too that we had to talk about, the School of Night, remember?
Yes.
Kola, right? And how did you translate that?
Which one?
Before you go on to answer, can Oyinda read the Yoruba version of that?
Yes.
Oyindamola.
Yeah, read that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so that, before you go on to answer the question, Kola. Oyinda, do you mind reading? Is Oyinda here?
Let me find them.
Yes, I am here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Oyinda. Do you mind reading the Yoruba version of listening?
Yes, yes. So, the Yoruba version, ìtẹ́tísí, ọ̀rọ̀ létí mi ẹnìkan àìrí. Kò tíì di ènìyàn ṣùgbọ́n ní ìdákẹ́jẹ́ ó ń jí pépé nínú mi. Kò tíì lórúkọ síbẹ̀ mò ń kọ́ ibùgbé fún un láti inú ọ̀rọ̀ sísọ. Díẹ̀ nínú ilé ayé ló dá dúró, yàtọ̀ fún ohun tí a sọ síta, ṣùgbọ́n díẹ̀ á dúró. Bí a bá tẹ̀síwájú láti máa sọ̀rọ̀, ọ̀rọ̀ nìkan ló lè tú àwọn ọgbà ilé ayé dá. Kì í ṣòdodo róòsì fúnra ẹ̀, ṣùgbọ́n ilé ìwé alẹ́ tí a ṣètò ẹ̀ sísẹ́gbẹ́ ẹ̀ tó ń jiyàn tó ń yìn, èyí tí a tún rántí báyìí. Òdòdó róòsì lè dá nìkan gbin èso ẹ̀, ṣùgbọ́n àwọn akéwì nílò olùwádìí iṣẹ́ wọn. Àwọn ìyá sì nílò èdè wọn fún ibi ìtẹ́mọ́sí. Ọmọ mi ọkùnrin sì wà lórí ewù igi tó ń gùn láàrin ìdákẹ́jẹ́ àwọn òdòdó àti ìtàkùrọ̀sọ tí àwọn òbí ẹ̀ fi fún un, ọ̀rọ̀ ọlọ́gbọ́n àti tòmùgọ̀ láti tàn án jáde. The end.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oyinda. That was beautiful.
Yes, I did love that particular poem. I remember thinking, about just almost like you're asking the question. It's a record of a parent's thinking about how their use of language can affect the child's perception of the world that is developing in their mind. And so that is acknowledging the role of parents as like kind of language teachers of the children. But this is a child that is not even there yet. At the time, I think it's a pregnant mother speaking about the process of a child acquiring this language that is being spoken, wise words, foolish words, just meant to draw them out into the world. So I find it very interesting. And then having to translate that, of course, into another language.
Thank you so much for that response, Kola. I mean, before you go on, I should also ask you, knowing that you've done a lot of work in advocating for the Yoruba language in different ways, on social media, through projects like yorubaNames.com and all of that. And I'm wondering if these projects in any way laid a groundwork for your career as a translator. Which came first? Advocacy for the Yoruba language, or how did this all work together?
Well, like I said, it's when the request came, I immediately said yes, because I thought it was, okay, I'm going to meet you again. So I immediately, took to it because it was an opportunity to, first for myself, to use Yoruba language in literature and writing. I've always mentioned, and lamented the lack of many opportunities to use Yoruba in literature today in Nigeria. There used to be a lot of original work written in the language in the 60s, 70s, but we don't have that anymore. But even translation, you have a lot of translations from English, from Yoruba to English. Shoyinka did the Fagunwa translations, but we don't have as many translations from English into the local language. So I was really interested in that. And as a linguist, the aspect that interested me a lot as a linguist had to do with just creating a corpus. So, I mean, I'm going to go a little technical. Linguists will always, I mean, people who work in language technology will always talk about needing large body of translated material between two languages, parallel data that can be used to train computer into how to learn how to translate from one to another. And to do this, you need thousands and thousands and thousands of text from one language to another. People who have done the Bible translation have helped in this regard. People who have translated news, like on BBC, etc., have helped. And in the end, when you have as many of these as possible, future tech people who want to work in language translation in an African language like Yoruba would have a lot of work to work with. So just need to look at the Yoruba version, look at the English version, feed it to the computer, and have it, do its thing. This is just one work. This is not going to be the one to do it, but I'm hoping that we can use it as a way to show that opportunities exist. First, to translate into the language. Second, that people exist that read it. This is very important to me actually, because again, people are writing, but not many are getting published. And that's because publishers think ahead that maybe it's not lucrative as a project to translate into, to sell things in a local language. At the beginning, I was even thinking of having the book just in Yoruba, totally complete in Yoruba without the English version beside it. Of course, I was talked down from that ledge, and I think it's probably a wise decision because you also need people who are learning to read the language who will be able to compare both in the same work. So this continues my advocacy, so to speak, and interest in making sure that literature exists in my language. I tend to write original work as well, if I can, as much as I can. But again, having publishers willing to take a risk on it will be really more important. This work was supported by UNICEF and Emily and a number of other people. Can we do the same work when we don't have big grants from organizations supporting it? And that's really the question.
Thank you, Kola. I think you already answered the question, which I was going to ask if this is going to be a continuing project. It would be good to see more translations actually from into Yoruba and
into all Nigerian languages.
Into all Nigerian languages, right? It would be good to see more translation. So, and also the other question, which I think you also answered, was why you decided on bilingual, but I think you've responded to that as well. If that was a decision between you and Emily. I will now ask Emily questions regarding the writing process itself of the of the book Childhood. So you already read Listening, but I picked on Listening and then the poem 36 Weeks and also Accident and Essence. And in reading the poem, one of the things that I understood about it was that there was also this attempt to understand what it meant to be a parent. And I would like to know in what way writing this poetry shaped you as a person in relation to the world and then connecting with your family as well. How did it make you listen more? In what ways did writing this poem, this poetry collection, connect you more to the world you're in?
Writing this poetry connection, what?
How did this the collection, the book Childhood itself, how did it connect you to the world? The process of the writing process itself, how did it prepare you to listen better? Because I identified 3 poems in the collection, Listening, 36 Weeks, Accident and Essence, as a process of listening itself, a process of trying to understand parenthood. And I'm wondering if writing the poem itself was a form of understand, or as a process of learning, a learning process, an understanding of parenthood, an understanding of childhood, and an understanding of yourself as well. Mm-hmm. How did it shape you? How did writing the poem shape you as a parent? How did it shape you as a person?
Right. So to answer the question, would you mind if I read First Piano Lesson?
Yes, yes,
Because
yes, it's okay.
I learned a lot from, in a way that I can explain after I read the poem. Is that right?
It's fine. Please go ahead and read the poem.
Okay, so my first two children learned to play the piano, and the last two children were listening to them learning to play the piano for many years. And then they finally got their first piano lesson. And that's what this poem is about. For years, they have been clicking the white keys, sometimes the black, occasionally haphazardly, great fingerfuls together. But where exactly was the music, they wondered? Gone. Today, they built a bridge from C to G, as if across Giverny's garden pond. Perhaps it is a rainbow. G to C, oral, slant visible, inevitable, clear. They stand amazed around the grand piano, capable at last of lifting up from sound's long restlessness, the dripping, glittery net of intervals, and in its woven net, that golden fish, a song. So I actually never learned how to play the piano, but all my kids did. And I just played the guitar because I wanted to be a folk singer when I was a teenager. But listening to my kids learn how to play the piano, one of the things that I realized was also the universality of music. And one of the things that happened because of this book was that it turned into 3 CDs. One in Japan, it's called First Piano Lesson by Koko Kanekawa. And then in Italy, Childhood Songs by Mirko Di Stefani. And then here in State College, one of the poems is in a CD by Bruce Trinkley. And I realized that in a way, I wish that I had written my poems more formally all the time so that they would be turned into songs, because I was so happy when these poems were turned into songs. And it's partly because when you learn a poem as a song, you never forget it. And, so it's the, having people remember your poems as songs. I don't know, and so that's what your question made me think of.
Thank you very much for responding to the question. I'm sure we got something from it. There are already questions in the chat box, and I'll come to that. But I would want Oredola Ibrahim to read the Yoruba version of the poem you read, and then I would read out some of the questions in the chat box. And yes, so Oredola, if you're here, do you mind reading the Yoruba version? Translation. Hello, Oredola?
He's here, but he's not unmuting himself.
Okay.
Alright, if you're here, please unmute yourself and read. Otherwise, we can come back to him, I guess.
Okay, I guess
Oh,
we
he's
can.
he's there now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Oredola. Do you mind reading the Yoruba translation of the poem that we just heard from Emily? First
Okay.
piano lesson.
Okay. Ẹ̀kọ́ dúró àkọ́kọ́. Fún ọdún pípẹ́, wọ́n ti ń tẹ bọ́tìnì funfun nìkan. Nígbà mìíràn, dúdú lẹ́ẹ̀kọ̀ọ̀kan lọ́nà tí ò bára mu. Gbogbo ìka papọ̀ lẹ́ẹ̀kan náà. Ṣùgbọ́n níbo gangan lorin wà? Wọ́n béèrè. Ó ti lọ. Lónìí, wọ́n kọ́ afárá láti sí Déjí. Àfi bí orí odò adágún ẹ̀yìnkùlé Gíbánì. Bóyá Òṣùmàrè ni jí dé sí. Ohun orin àfẹ́ẹ̀rí ìpọn dandan mímọ́. Wọ́n dúró pẹ̀lú ìyanu bí wọ́n ṣe yí dúrù ńlá ká tó ti kápá nígbẹ̀yìn láti gbéga láti inú ìsákiri orin àlàfo ìkántó tó ń tàn yanranyanran àti kókó okùn ẹ̀. Ẹja wúrà nì orin. Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you so much for that reading. I'm going to go on to the questions in the chat box right now. There's a question from Abi Ogunsoya. Do you want to ask the question or do you want me to read it out, Abi? Okay, I think she does want me to read it out. So I'm going to read it to you, Kola. There's a question for you and Emily here. So the question for Kola says, you have been translating works for a while now, but I want to know if you encountered any unique challenges or insights from translating Emily's poems. I think you responded to this in a way earlier, but if you want to add something, please go ahead, Kola.
Trying to see if there's any other new thing that I discovered in the process. Well, I mentioned earlier, but translating Yoruba to English, English to Yoruba offers a challenge of not just translating the words, but also the rhythm, especially because it's poetry. If it were prose, it would be easy to just focus on the meaning and the text. But in this case, I have to, after translating the meaning, also then read it to myself and see if it can make sense when somebody has read it out. So I spend a lot of time rereading the work after I finish translating them out loud to myself to see whether it makes some sense as a kind of rhythmic poem. Like I said, it doesn't get to the perfect point of Yoruba poetry, which needs a lot of more work and more infusion of rhythmic bases and a number of other things. Yoruba poetry is based mostly on rhythm. But in the process of getting to this point, I realized that even Yoruba poetry in writing is itself a genre, and it's equally as worthy of existence, basically. Yeah. So I hope that makes some sense.
Thank you, Kola. Now this question is for you, Emily. Abby wants to know, she says, I have always wondered how writers feel about translations of their work into languages they don't understand. Do you ever worry that some of the essence of your work might get lost in translation? I think she already answered this question as well.
Yeah, you asked that earlier as well.
Yeah. So, and then Bamidele Ali wants to know if Emily, is asking, as that has been discussed, it's always difficult to translate words by word, as it has to make sense in the final language due to cultural differences. What do you think about the different melody and movements in the translated language from your English version? Well, I don't think Emily can read Yoruba, but yeah, but if you do want to go ahead to respond to that question, Bamidele wants to know what you think about the different melody and movements in the translated language from your English version. I'm thinking Kola would be in a better position to respond to this question though, but yeah, I'm going to leave the floor open.
I assume that, I will give Emily a chance to speak, but I assume that because her work has been translated into many languages, Some of them tonal, I assume. I don't know if Japanese is tonal, but if my work were translated into a language I don't speak, I would assume that it would be up to the readers and people who listen to the work in that language to see whether they get a sense of, the work of what I've done. All I'll be left to enjoy is just the way it sounds, even if I don't understand what it is. So Emily, how do you feel listening to this in Yoruba?
So I just wanted to ask, Robbie got to read a poem, but Will wanted to read Putting on the Ritz. And then I was wondering if Kola could talk about his translation and read his translation of it.
Yes, I would love to. Let's have him read the English and I'll read the
Because
English.
everybody else got to read a poem so far, but Will still hasn't had a chance to read a poem.
Oh, okay.
Will, please go ahead.
Okay, I was going to ask Will to read the poem after you respond to the question. I was going to ask him if he would read the Discovery and Rain, and Bemisola would read the Yoruba version. But so that was what I wanted you to finish responding to the questions.
Emily,
if that's okay.
Will, do you have a preference for that particular poem, or do you want to read the Discovery of Rain?
I'm happy with either.
Because we had someone read the Yoruba, prepare to read the Yoruba version, so it'd be nice to have both of them side by side.
Yes, let me just pull it up. It'll take me a second.
Okay, Jumoke, are you saying anything?
No, we are waiting. We'd wait for Will to prepare to read the poem. Okay, so
it's on page 30 of the new book. I don't know what page is on the old one. Discovery of Rain.
This is Robbie Discovers Rain.
Yes.
Yes. The Discovery of Rain. Yeah.
I guess I'm stealing one of Robbie's poems, but I hope he'll forget. So thank you everyone for organizing this. This has been really lovely. Robbie Discovers Rain. Barefoot, bareheaded, except for those luxuriant black curls, Robbie stands at play in April grass. Rain starts suddenly, lightly, so at first he notices not at all. Then touches his curls to find them damp and dampening. Touches the earth, discovers something new that changes everything. Looks up now to know the source and sees just leaves and air, but goes on looking up because, reality or dream, it pleases him to be watered by warm rain.
Thank you very much. By the way, I noticed that poem has Robbie's name in it, but the ones in the books don't have them. So this must be the earlier version.
Yeah.
Well done. Bimi, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Great.
I'm going to read the Yoruba version of.
You have the floor.
So, Ìwárí òjò, láì wọ bàtà, láì borí, àfi fún àwọn irun dúdú mìrìnmìrìn yẹn. Ọmọdé jòjòló yìí dìde ṣeré lórí koríko oṣù kẹrin. Òjò bẹ̀rẹ̀ lójijì, díẹ̀díẹ̀. Nítorí náà, níbẹ̀rẹ̀, kò rí rárá. Ìgbà tó yá, ó fọwọ́ kan irun ẹ̀ láti rí pé wọ́n tutù, wọ́n sì ń tutù sí. Fọwọ́ kan ilẹ̀, ó rí nǹkan tuntun tó yí gbogbo nǹkan padà. Ó wòkè láti mọ ibi tó ti wá. Ó sì rí ewé àti atẹ́gùn nìkan, ṣùgbọ́n ó tẹ̀síwájú láti má wòkè nítorí pé ojú ayé tàbí àlá. Ó dùn mọ́ nínú láti wà ní ibòmíràn láti ọwọ́ òjò àtura.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bemisola. So I'm going to ask before I go on to, we have like 10 minutes more before we, I'm going to go on to read a question from the chat. Please, if you do have questions, you can send your questions to the chat box, or you could let me know that you have a question, and I'm sure the authors will be ready to respond to you. Okay, so Oredola, do you want me to read your question, or do you want to ask it yourself? Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to read.
Yeah, let me.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Ask myself.
You're breaking up really bad.
Okay.
Don't worry, Oredola.
Good work.
You are breaking up.
Kola,
Let me ask
this is really a fantastic translation observation. I noticed that when you're translating the okay.
Hello, Oredola.
He's gone again.
Yeah. I think I'm just going to read out the question. So Oredola wants to know, why is it that you leave some names of places in the source work as they are, and other times you try to localize them? And he says, for instance, you retain Giverny, while other times when you got to Germany, you translated it to Germany. What determines your choice in each circumstances?
Yes, basically, if the words were common enough to be translated, I did the translation. It was Iluoba or Germany or America, etc. Those are words that we already localized. If there are specialized words like Giverny, which seemed like it was better to remain there without bringing confusion when I try to translate, and people have to wonder what it is. I mean, it's not, you can say that I wasn't totally consistent in all of this, but in my judgment, my defense, it's a method to the madness, which is that there are some words that I think people would be able to understand in Yoruba much better, and there are some words that are best left where they are. In any case, the way we speak Yoruba today, we throw in a few foreign words here and there, and that's perfect as well. And that's how I go about it. That's how I defend it in any case.
Okay. Thank you, Kola. And there's also a question from Akande Shokan. Would you like me to read the poem? I mean, read the question, Prof. Or would you rather ask the question yourself? Okay, I will take that I should read the question. So she's asking if did Emily Grosholz herself, a translator, learn nothing from this process, assuming she was in conversation with the translator, or to put the question in a less accusatory manner, why was she interested in having a Yoruba translation? So Emily, I think that question is for you. Akande Shokan would like to know why you were interested in having a Yoruba translation.
Well, for a number of reasons. I'm a member of the African American community here at Penn State. 2 of my kids are African American. I've always wanted to go to Africa, but I haven't been able to do that yet. And I really wanted my book to be translated into a few African languages.
Okay, thank you for that response. I hope that answers your question, Professor Deshokan. So far, thank you so much for your patience, everyone. Eniyolashomi, like we would say in Yoruba. Do you mind translating that, Kola? We've had. Please go ahead and translate that.
Yeah, people are my
I'm not putting you on the spot.
You are. People are my government. Yes.
Okay, so according to Kola's translation, that would mean people are my garments.
Yeah,
is that right?
My garment is made of people, yeah.
My garment is made of people. Eniyolashomi, which is a way of saying thank you to everyone who has come to join us today. We would want to spend more time here, and there's so many questions we would like to ask. In fact, this book is something that I'm really proud of because I think it's wonderful. I like the poems that Emily has written, and I like the translation as well. And I'm sure that we're all going to get copies of this book, not just because we have listened to the wonderful poems here, but also because we want to support UNICEF and the wonderful work they're doing, you know. So thank you for joining us in your last show of me. People make my garment. Thank you, friends. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. Thank you so much. We hope Kola would continue to do more translations, that we'll get to read more authors in Yoruba. Emily, we are looking forward to the work you're doing. I also want to say a special thanks to Marilyn Nelson for joining us today. We do appreciate that the Marilyn Nelson did join us. I can't mention all our friends and all of those who read. We very much appreciate your rendition, beautiful poetry. It makes me love language the more.
Jumoke, 1 second, if you don't mind. Alex Pepple is here. I wanted to say a few words. He's the one who first contacted me with this opportunity. I would like to hear what, what was the...
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, if you would like to say.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, it was really interesting because Emily was interested in having her book into an African language because I'm from Nigeria originally. And I'd already done a book with Emily where she is a collector of her work, which also includes poems from childhood. So it was really a good opportunity for me to help her, you know, get her book reach other people in Africa. So with Emily's interest, I was able to get Kola to do the translation in Yoruba, and I also was able to get another lady from the University College London to do translation in Swahili. So she will have 2 African languages into which childhood will be translated.
We have you to thank and to blame for everything.
I'm sure you're glad.
I think Ropo wants to either say something or read something. I'm not sure, but I see.
Okay, please. It would be good to have Ewenla reads from the collection because he has a very wonderful voice and he's an actor, you know. So we get the honor of having him read from this. Would you mind reading a poem from the collection? Ewenla?
Yes, let's do it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just falling in love with Autumn Sonata. I'd love to do it in both languages, but for time I'll do just the Yoruba version. Sonata Ibrahim. Àwọn pẹ́pẹ́yẹ ò farabalẹ̀, wọ́n fò kọjá lókè. Gbogbo ọ̀rọ̀ tó sì gbọ́ ló ń rẹ̀wẹ̀sì. O ò lè rí àwọn ọ̀rọ̀ yìí gbámú. Rárá, kò tí ì yá. Ṣùgbọ́n o lè fojú sun orin náà. Ìbínú a máa mú ẹ̀sùn kún. Ẹ̀rín gidi a sì mú ẹ̀rín músẹ́ aláìléyìn ẹ̀ jáde. Ó dìde láti wò ó. Ó tẹ́tí bí ó ṣe jókòó sórí ìtàn àwọn èèyàn tó ń sọ̀rọ̀. Ó ń wòye irú ibi tí ayé lè dorí kọ. Inú ẹ̀ fẹ́lẹ́ bí ewé tídò. Bàbá ẹ̀ àti èmi fọwọ́ pa ẹ́ lórí. Nígbà tá a bá gbé ẹ dání láìròtì, wàá sì gbé orí ẹ sókè síbi ọwọ́ yìí. Ara ẹ kákò pẹ̀lú. Wà tí inú ẹ bá kún. Ó sì nàka nígbà tí ebi bá dé. A pè ẹ́ lórúkọ ẹ. Ó sì wẹ̀gbẹ́ pẹ̀lú ìfẹ́ inú àti àìmọ̀. Òun fẹ́ gbá àwọn ìka tí ó ń jómú. Láti kọrin, láti fihàn, láti dáhùn, láti rántí ìkọ̀ọ̀kan àwọn ewé gírèpù bí wọ́n ṣe ń ṣubú lulẹ̀. Igi apádò onírẹ̀lẹ̀ àti èpo iyebíye olófèéfèé. Síbẹ̀, fún pípọ̀ nínú àsìkò yìí, ó tètè gbàgbé. Síbẹ̀, mo kọ èyí sílẹ̀ kí o bá lè sọ fún wa tó bá yá ohun tó túmọ̀ sí. Ọmọ mi aláròyé tó lè sọ̀rọ̀, tó tẹ́tí sí bí àwọn ẹyẹ ṣe ń fò lọ sí gúúsù. Ó mọ dídùn orin, ṣùgbọ́n ó mọ àwọn ọ̀rọ̀ ibẹ̀.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate your performance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was a very good way to close the session. I hope you all enjoyed being here today, and thank you for joining us this 1.5 hour. Perhaps we'll have more of this in future, hopefully. Kola, that's to you.
And thank you, Jumoke, for your wonderful moderation. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Will, Robert, Katerina, Marilyn, everyone that came to join us. Thank you for the questions and everything else. You can buy the books on eBay and hopefully on Amazon soon. And people in Nigeria can buy it on Roving Heights and Huda Books as well. This is all for me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Jumoke, again. Unless anyone has anything else to say, I think this will be a way to round off. Is anybody raising their hands to say anything? Okay.
Àwa ń lọ, ó dìgbà ó ṣe, ká má fi ikú yára wa. Which is a way of saying,
Ká má fàrùn yára wa lórí.
Àwa ń lọ,
ó dìgbà ó ṣe, ká má fi ikú yára wa, ká má fàrùn yára wa.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to meet everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It was lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, same here.
Congratulations, Kola. Congratulations, Emily.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Kola.
Thank you, sister.
Wonderful job, Kola. Thank you, Emily. Good seeing you again.
Congratulations. Getting a copy the next couple of days. You get it.
Hi, Jumoke.
Ma, yes, ma.
Good evening.
Good evening, ma.
Yeah, just greeting you.
Now, so we can
hear me.
Want to talk? We can talk.
Okay. My sister. Hello.
Well done. Good
Yes,
job.
ma. Thank you.
Well done, Kola.
Thank
well
you.
Done, well done, and I hope we get to see more of this in future.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
really great. If people want to talk, they can talk, but I want the recording to stop now. It's your hand.
All right, I'm gonna have to leave.
How are you?
Oh yeah, cool.
You can stop the recording, please. You know you're the host.